There we go. That's annoying. Okay, we got two people. We'll give it a couple minutes. If you're in, would you just drop in something in the chat so I can make sure it's working, please? 3, up to 3. All right, we'll type something in. Good morning, Miss Smith. Good morning, Miss Carter. Is that people having a good morning? Morning, Miss Frazier. Oh, we're a whopping 4 whole people. Well, whatever the count is, I will start at 5 after. Oh, down to 3. Oh wow, we lost 25%. At 5 after, I'll start everything and going through the content. Morning, Miss Wade. Hey, that's better. That white thing. That. So yeah, sorry about this. We have not had a fully functioning heater in our home since the 11th of November, and it's just been quite a struggle to get it repaired. And when they finally told me yesterday that they were going to be here tomorrow or today, but anywhere between like 8:30 and 1:30, I was just, I knew I had to stay home because, I want a functioning heater in my house, especially during the winter. All right, so I'll give it like 2 more minutes and then we'll kind of launch into everything and go over the free will. But I sent an email, Miss Wade. I literally put out an announcement. I try and be up to date on my giving of information. But yes, hopefully at the end of today, I have a fully functioning heater for the home because, that's always nice. Well, yeah, that's one of the problems with email. It's only helpful if you check it before the information is importantly, needed to be known, as it were. Right, just about about 90 more seconds. I can't remember the last time I had to kind of call an emergency. We're going to stream it online. Actually, yeah, I can remember the last time was when we went into the pandemic shutdown, 2 years ago, literally almost 2 years ago to the day. That's when I said, okay, I'm going to do the live stream. And then I ended up having to do the live stream on my Instagram account because I hadn't, gotten the necessary permissions that you have to wait, 24 hours once you get the permissions. All right. So just about 1 minute more, we were up to 7 people, but now we're back down to 6. So not sure what's going on, but if folks ask you or whatnot, and they come to, look at the live stream, just tell them that, things really start at the 5-minute mark. So that they don't have to sit through watching me kind of blather on. You have to watch me blather on. Sorry about that. But you get to do that every day in class, so I guess you're used to it by now. But, I took notes. I actually have notes for, you can't see it. White balance is too screwy. And because this is one of the more difficult articles that you will read for the class because of the technical nature of the topics and whatnot. But I think we're down to 5. We reached a high water mark of 7, and now we're back down to 5. Oh well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So today we're going to continue on with the problem of evil, and this is specifically focusing on kind of the free will arguments or the free will defenses in the problem of evil. And so if you have any questions about the text, like specific questions about the text, you can put them please in the chat, and I'll make sure to ask them, because I have my text pulled up on the computer and I can go and check those specific areas. So just drop them in and I'll get to them as I notice when they come up. To recap, what we did on Tuesday and the basic problem of evil is the following. If you have a God that's omnipotent, omnibenevolent, all good, all-knowing, omniscient, the three omnis, that tends to lead to some weird problems. That is, one of them being the problem of evil. How could an all-good creator create a world in which there was evil? That's just seemingly what I have called and said is metaphysically impossible. Something that is 100% good could not have allowed evil to come into the world, okay? Also, the other problem is that if God is all-powerful and God is a moral being, he's all good, that would seem to indicate that any sort of evil that's out there that he could fix, he should fix. But he doesn't. So why is that? So either he's not all omnipotent and he created a world because he's not all powerful, and as a result, evil can get into it, or he's not omnipotent because he's not changing things and he knows he should, okay? Or he might not be omniscient in that he doesn't know that they're bad. But any of those, if you give on any of those, you threaten the traditional notion of the Christian God. So that's just a little, hi Francesca, how you doing? So now we're going to we're going to go into the free will defense, because a lot of folks, when they think about evil and this sort of thing, they attribute evil to the fact that we can choose to do bad things. And since we are agents, we are beings that have free will, that God gave us free will. Well, that's how evil gets into the world. So it's not really a problem for God. It's not a problem for God being omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent, all good, all powerful, and all knowing, right? The idea is something like this, and intuitively it goes a little bit like this. It is better, and this is in the free will defense, where your author lays out the four premises of the basic free will debate, or free will explanation. He says one thing, it's better to create a world that consists of free beings. That's better than a world in which you've created robots that just do what they're told. The other premise is God intends to create the best of all possible worlds. So we talked about this a bit on Tuesday, but the main thing was, in the best of all possible worlds, okay, that possible world has in it agents that are free, okay? Also, God can't interfere, because that would violate rule number one. If God has created the best of all possible worlds, right, in a world of free beings, he can't interfere, because that world would be somehow changed. And more importantly, if he interfered with the free choices of the things that he created, they wouldn't thereby be free. So this is the kind of the non-interference clause of the argument, okay? That's, to recap, the basic idea behind the free will defense. God creates a world in which there are beings that can choose the good or not. God can't interfere, because in so interfering would make their choices not be choices. Because if I was going to choose to go out and do the bad thing and he stopped me, then I didn't really have a choice, did I? And then the last thing is that it's better to create a world full of beings that are free. And another way to think about that is, I'm a parent, okay? I don't want my kids just to do the right thing because they're afraid of getting punished. I don't want my kids to do the right thing because they were told to do it or they had no choice. It would seem to me that my kids would be better people if they learned what the right thing was and they chose to do it. And most people would agree that kind of fits our intuitions. And I don't see a problem with that in any way, shape, or form, just kind of as a matter of intuitive, belief that, yeah, it does seem better that when you give beings the option to choose the good, that's somehow better than them just doing the good because that's what they were told. We're not computers. We have choice. But when you have choice, you can choose not to do the good thing. And there is where the evil will get into the world. Because God created these beings that choose, those non-natural evils that we talked about on Tuesday are things that we can choose to do. We can choose to be gluttonous. We can choose to be wrathful. We can choose to be slothful. All the 7 deadly sins. We can choose to do all sorts of those things, right? And as a result, well, hey, this is where evil comes into the world. And it doesn't threaten, and this is the really important part, when you conceptualize things in this way, it doesn't threaten those 3 omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient, right? The all good, all powerful, and all knowing. It doesn't threaten those because, again, God created the world. He created us the ability to choose. And while we did choose to do the wrong thing, he's not responsible for that. So it's neither a threat to his knowledge, nor a threat to his power, nor a threat to his goodness that we choose to do the wrong things. Okay? There's a minor worry that if the world has the possibility, the potential for evil, he created the situations in which those things could arrive. And while he didn't create evil exactly, he created the conditions under which evil can thrive. I can see where people would say, well, then he still didn't create it. So he's still all good, all powerful, and all knowing. Now, there's something that comes in here with what is happening with God's omniscience, with his all knowing, and what your author calls middle knowledge. And I think this is actually kind of a handy way to think about some of the things that are going on with this issue. And really, with him being omniscient, with him being all knowing, with God being having that characteristic, it sets up some rather difficult things for us to deal with, okay? And I alluded to them a little bit on Tuesday, but we're going to run into them again when we do free will on its own. So this free will defense and these ideas around free will are going to pop back up a little bit later in the semester. But let's look at it this way. And if I had a board in front of me, I would start to lay this out. But there are a couple of ways you can conceptualize, you can think about God's foreknowledge, okay? Foreknowledge just means he knows the future. Fair enough. Okay, good. But what does that knowledge look like? When people say God has a plan, it usually has some sort of, idea behind it that there's this book or a chart that you can follow and you can see the world, how the world is going to turn out. When A happens, then B happens, and then C happens. It's a chain of events that's all related back to, an initial setup condition, right? The Big Bang, or, God snapping his fingers and making the world come into being. Whatever it is, there's only one path. And that's what you need to think about. If God's foreknowledge is knowledge of the very path that everything and everyone takes, then it's a complex path filled with lots of actors, but there's only one path. Now you can switch that. So let's just call that kind of simple foreknowledge, okay? That is, God knows what's going to happen. There's nothing else that could have happened, so God doesn't need to know possible outcomes. He just needs to know the outcome. But some theorists have talked about what's called the middle knowledge. And I had thought of this years ago, and I never knew there was a name for it. But there's the idea that God knows not exactly what's going to happen, but God knows all the possible outcomes at any given particular time. So if I decided, just before I got online today to do this, I could have just said, no, I'm not going to do it, and canceled the live stream and just not shown up, and then students would be confused, the 8 or 9 of you that are actually watching, right? Well, he said he'd be here, but he wasn't. So prior to making the choice, God knows in the sense of middle knowledge that I could choose to go and do the live stream, or I could choose not to do the live stream. But if I choose to do the live stream, then there are certain things I can no longer ever do. I can't choose not to do the live stream, okay? If I choose not to do the live stream, then certain things are going to happen. Students are going to be confused. Students may raise complaints to me and say, hey, you said you were going to be there for this and you weren't. And if this is going to be on a test, hey, what's the deal with that? though I'm pretty sure students would be less friendly to me in that complaint. But notice when you make a choice or when certain things happen, certain other things can't. So imagine God's knowledge being like a really, really detailed map that shows all possible choice points and all possible outcomes from those choice points. So that when Dr. Mike decides to choose to do the live stream, then all these other choices and all these other consequences of him choosing not to do it go away. They can't ever be realized. So the book, the plan, the map changes every time a single choice is. But then it opens up a whole new branch of possibilities, right? So he could choose to do the live stream, but he could say something like, yeah, I didn't want to do the live stream, so I'm going to kill it at about 7 minutes. Later, everybody, deal with it. Something like that, right? Every choice makes certain other choices or other possible outcomes impossible, but then opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. And if you think about it in that way, that God's knowledge is not knowledge of exactly what will happen, but all possible outcomes, God's knowledge is thereby increased. He's, in fact, he knows more than just the God that knows exactly what's going to happen. And there you can say, yeah, God's still omniscient. He knows everything. He knows a whole lot more than everything. He knows all possible things. And then this fits back into that premise where God intends to create the best of all possible worlds. He knows all the possibilities. He's creating the one that is the best of those possibilities. And within that one, he knows that there are choice points, and he can kind of figure out what's going to happen when and where and what the repercussions of those choices are. What you want to remember right now is that all the free will defense is trying to do is keep God being all powerful, all knowing, and all good, to keep those three things true, but then make it make sense against our world. If you go back to the notion that we covered on Tuesday about natural and non-natural evils, the natural evils aren't a problem because they're not really evils. They're just ways that the world has worked itself out. The non-natural evils, being the result of choice, then makes sense in that framework, because these non-natural evils that God could do, or that God knows that are out there, aren't the result of his responsibility. He wasn't responsible for them. More importantly, because it's important to have beings that choose, that learn to choose, and in fact choose the right thing to do, God is no longer under any moral obligation to fix those problems. So yeah, there was a whole bunch of bad stuff in the Holocaust, in slavery, but those were not designs or results of the design of God. They were the result of choices made. And in a very strange sense, when people learn about slavery now, they realize, oh yes, it's wrong and it won't happen again. That may be cold comfort to people who had ancestors who were enslaved, but that seems to be something like what's going on, right? And oftentimes, not to use a slavery example, we do use the consequences and the outcomes of our bad choices and what we learn from them to then make the proper choice the next time. And that seems to be a sort of moral improvement. And this is the idea that free will gives you the ability to choose the wrong thing to do. And as a result, God's no longer responsible. He doesn't need to fix it, because to fix it would be to ruin the free choices that individuals have. Right? So that's one version of the free will defense. It's a pretty good one, actually, because notice what it's trying to do. On Tuesday, the issues that were laid out were that if you take these three qualifications of God, all powerful, all knowing, and all good, they lead to some really sticky outcomes. One, you might not have free will. Two, if God's all powerful, then God should be fixing the evils that are in the world. He's responsible, in a sense, to do that, in the same way that you and I are responsible to fix bad things when we see them, when they're within our power. Since God's all powerful, well, he should fix it. It doesn't cost him anything to fix it. Notice what the free will defense does. He's still all powerful. He just doesn't fix them, because in not fixing them, he leaves free choice and the repercussions of free choice so that people can learn. He's still all good because he created people people who can choose, who are the best kind of people that are out there, better than, say robots or computers. And if you took away their free choice, then they would be robots or computers. So that's fine, right? And he's all knowing in the sense that he has this middle knowledge. He knows the all possible outcomes, but he doesn't know which one in particular you'll choose. He may have an intuitive sense or an inductive sense. That is, if you're the sort of person that likes sweets like I am, when presented with a chance to get a cookie at lunch, you're likely going to get it. Though it might be the case that you said, nope, today I'm just going to not get a cookie because I need to watch it. Well, unfortunately for me, I need to watch like not having a cookie every time I eat. And well, I don't deal with that too well. I like the cookies. But God would be able to know that likely this person would get the cookie or this person wouldn't get the cookie, okay? But they know all possible outcomes as a result of either taking the cookie or not taking the cookie. So hopefully you see that what the philosopher is very good at doing is kind of laying out the premises, laying out the implication of those premises, and then in trying to respond to critiques, saying, okay, well, here's how we can save that, here's how we can save that, and here's how we can save that, and thus the Judeo-Christian notion of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God is preserved. So that's one approach. That's one way to deal with this problem, okay? I still think personally that if God created the potential for evil, then he's still got some sort of responsibility there. But to be honest, I haven't studied the stuff that far. So I don't know exactly what to say. I can see the points that people like Plantinga, who your author references, are making. I don't know if they're satisfactory, but they're interesting moves kind of within the framework of the theodicy, of understanding what God is and how God works. So just to take a pause, does anyone have any questions about what I just went over? Anything that you'd like to see clarified relative to that sort of thing? Because we're going to turn to a different attempt to explain the problem of evil. I'll give it about 10 seconds, or sorry, I need to give it probably 30 seconds so that if anyone has a question, it shows up in the chat. So give it about 15 more seconds. It doesn't look like anyone's got a question. Okay. Doesn't look like anyone's got it. Again, if you have a question, you're more than welcome to pop it in, and I can go back at some point and deal with it. All right. So the second way to deal with the problem of evil, and this is not something that you've read. It's not something that I asked you to read. I just added in because it's interesting for a number of reasons. One, it's a very early Christian, Christian founding father named St. Augustine, who St. Augustine wasn't always a Christian. He's an African guy from North Africa, and apparently when he was younger, he wasn't a Christian, and he apparently he's a really good writer, and he's also funny because he said this. He said, "Lord, please grant me chastity, just not yet." Right? I want to be chaste, and I want to not womanize, but not yet. Can I wait a couple of months and then get it out of my system? So he was aware. Apparently, he was quite the man about town for his day. So Augustine was this early church father who became a bishop and started to think really hard about God and Christianity and what it meant to be a Christian, and issues of doctrine. And he came up with this really, really interesting approach to dealing with the problem of evil, because at that point, this notion of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God was pretty well established in Christian theology, for lack of a better term. And he says, okay, well, yeah, if evil is a thing in the world, that's a problem for an all-good, all-powerful, and all-knowing God. It just, logically, it shouldn't be there. And if logic's telling us it shouldn't be there, we need to pay attention to that sort of thing. Okay, sounds good. So he starts thinking. He said, well, then what is evil, really? How should we best think about what evil is? And when I ask you to point out evil things in the world, you'll point to behaviors and you'll say that's evil, or you'll point to outcomes. You'll say those are evil outcomes. And it seems like you're pointing out a thing in the same way that I would point out what a pen is. That's a pen right there. well, that's evil over there, right? Okay. Well, it starts to strike St. Augustine as odd that we would think of evil as a thing. If we stop thinking about it as a thing, well, we might be able to get around the problem of evil for Christian belief. Because if evil doesn't exist as a thing in the same way that a pencil or a pen exists, well, then God didn't create it, and he didn't create evil. And so what he's going to do is he's going to ask us to reconceptualize what we think of evil as. And he does it, he begins, strangely enough, ironic for our class, but he begins with an analogy. So he starts with an argument by analogy. And I'm sure you all love this. The fact that I get to say, oh, see, look, yet another analogy argument. There you go. Again, it's like I had a plan. When you're sick, when you are ill, when you have a disease, you don't really have anything. You have, in Augustine's mind, you have a lack of health. You are not as healthy as you could be. You are not as good, or you're not functioning in the way that you ought to be. And this makes sense, right? When I'm sick and I have a cold, I can't taste things as well. I can't smell things as well. I feel chilly, whatever it happens to be. But things aren't working as they should, okay? When you have, COVID and you can't smell because, that's one of the outcomes of COVID, or breathing is difficult. Your body is not performing in the ways that it should. And he said, we should think of evil in the same way that we think of ill health, as not a thing, but as a lacking. Evil as what's called a privation, Privation, like deprivation. A privation is a lacking. So if you start to think of evil as not a thing, but a failure or a lacking of goodness, a lacking of good health, sickness is a lack of good health, evil is a lack of moral goodness in the being that's, making the choices, there's no more problem of evil. It simply goes away because evil isn't a thing, it's a lack. And God can't create a lacking, can he? Doesn't make sense. You don't create a missing thing. A thing is just missing. It's less than. And then now if you start to think about things like free will and the notion that God wants us to do well on earth, that God wants us to learn how to do well and learn from our mistakes, this starts to make a lot of sense. No longer is evil a thing, it's a lacking. And because we have free will, we often choose and fail to do what we ought to do. One thing to think about is just ask yourself how many times a day you fail to do as you should do. And I'll bet you money, it's a lot of times. There are a lot of things that you fail to do that you should do, right? So right now I've got 5 people who are sitting in on the 4 now, sitting in on the lecture when I normally have 20 or 25. So if the math is right, say 20 people haven't done what they're supposed to do, which is show up for an online session. Because, and I understand this, right, it's online, it's going to be recorded. I can go watch it when I have the time. So this gives me a chance to sleep in. Makes perfect sense, right? But not all failings are moral failings or deep moral failings, okay? Like this morning, I should have gotten up and stretched. If I want my body to feel better, if I want to be able to do more exercise and just overall feel healthier, I should, given my age, I should stretch in the mornings, right? I should do some sort of warm-up routine because I'm not 20 and 20-year-olds can just kind of get up and go do things. That's just what happens as you get older. So I failed to be as healthy as I could be. I failed to imagine that when I showed up for this online live stream, as opposed to a non-online live stream. Anyways, you get the point. If I showed up to the live stream and I hadn't prepared in any way, shape, or form, right? I fail to do my job as a teacher. I am, in a sense, in that place, a bad teacher, which is, why we write notes and why I read and why you should read as a student before you come to class, because you ought to. It's part of being a good student. But when you fail to do what you ought, or if I fail to prep in the way that I should as a professor, it's not, I'm not doing evil. I'm failing to be as I want to be. And remember, that's God's point. God wants us to be good. God thinks that it's better that we choose the good because these are all better things for created beings to do than to simply be robots. So it's actually a pretty brilliant little move, because he takes the metaphysical problem of evil as a thing and he just says, goes away, not a problem, not even a remote problem, because evil isn't a thing. And this is a really important general lesson to take from what Augustine did. Oftentimes when we confront a problem and when we think about a problem, we get locked into a particular way of thinking. When we're locked into that particular way of thinking, it may lead us into weird places. It may lead us to think wrong things. Again, if you think that evil is a thing and you think that God is all good and is the creator of everything, then you run into this contradiction which suggests that God isn't all good or isn't all knowing. And clearly, Augustine as a Christian is not happy with that. And he said, the reason that you're thinking that way is because you're conceptualizing evil in the wrong way. If you change your conception, you're going to have a better way of dealing with this problem. And I think he's right in that. So oftentimes when you confront a problem in your life and you are thinking about it in a certain way, sometimes the way to fix it is to think about it differently. And let me give you an example that just came up. I have a friend and colleague who's a new parent, and her job has her going on occasion to conferences. And she put up on Facebook and said, my job takes me to conferences. My child is young, and it feels like I'm missing out on something, and I need to somehow make it up to my kid that I'm missing out. And understandable, right? I felt the same thing when I had to leave my kids early on, when I had to go to conferences and whatnot, right? Most parents want to be with their kids, and they feel bad about not being with their kids. And I was thinking about the question for a moment, and I said, you know what? Don't think of this as a missing out or as something you have to make up to your child, because you're working at your job. And if your job requires this, you're not doing it to not take care of your kid or not pay attention to your kid. You're in the job so that you can take care of your kid. Literally, this is one of the things you have to do for your job so that your kid can have, a parent that is able to support them. For me, I thought that was a pretty good way of alleviating the guilt that my colleague might feel because she believes that she's missing out. And I'm like, you're not missing out, and you're definitely not needing to make up something, right? It's not like you have failed to execute your duty as a parent. In going to this conference, if it's part of your job responsibilities, and part of being a parent is having a job so you can provide for them, then I think you're doing just fine. This isn't to say that not being there for your kid is preferable, right? We'd all like to be there for our kids whenever we could, but life just doesn't allow us. So that switch, that changing in how you conceptualize what's going on there, can fundamentally change how you respond to the problem, or if you think it's even a problem at all. Because if she looks at it and says, you're right, it's not a problem, I don't feel bad. Doesn't mean I'm a horrible parent. Yeah, cool, great. Imagine all the stress that you could lose if you reconceptualize things in ways that did something like that. And that was kind of my point, is that you're adding guilt and shame to yourself when I don't think you need to be adding guilt and shame to yourself for doing things that people have to do, right? You're not being a bad parent, you're being a good parent. So, check that stuff at the door. So that was a little bit about St. Augustine's privation approach, right? Not viewing evil as a thing, but viewing evil as a lacking, as a privation. Does anyone have any questions about that particular response to the problem of evil? We'll just give it about 20 more seconds, see if everything pops in the chat. Trying to think of something funny to say, but I don't have anything at this moment, because as exhausting as it is for you to try and watch this sort of stuff, it's harder for me because I don't have your faces to see like, oh, you don't understand what I'm saying and whatnot. But anyways, we'll move on now. This is the last one, and it'll only take a couple of minutes because it's a very strange solution to the problem of evil. It's what I've kind of considered or talked about as, not in here, but what's often talked about as kind of a Christian mystic, a mystical position. And these are the folks that literally believe that God is in the world, that God is the world. So God is in you, God is in me, God is in the chair I'm sitting on, he's in the wall, he's in that picture, he's out there on the road outside my house. God is the world and the world is God. This may sound strange to you, and I perfectly understand why it might, but there are people out there, Christian mystics of a sort, that believe this sort of thing. And again, what I'm trying to do is show you how this conceptualization gets rid of the problem of evil as it's posed and as we've been discussing. How does evil get into the world if God's all good, all powerful, and all knowing? Well, if God is the world, then whatever you see as evil isn't evil because God's the world. That's the end of the story. And this is, in a sense, even a more radical reconceptualization of evil than St. Augustine's approach, where he says it's not a thing, it's a lacking. This is just saying there really isn't any evil because literally God is the world. So if God is the world and you think that this is evil and you think that God is also all good, those two thoughts can't be together. They're contradictory. So either God is evil or what we perceive as evil in the world isn't really evil. I'm going to let you decide how you want to go with that one, because it is when you make that move, if you say that God is the world, suddenly lots of stuff change. Lots of stuff has to change in how you conceptualize it, right? If God is the world, does God know anything? I have no idea. If God is the world, is God all powerful? I have no clue how to reconcile those things. Now, I'm sure there are people who have thought about these things and made some sort of reconciliation of those ideas, but it's something I typically end the session with when I present this stuff for classes, that it's this mystical position that God is the world. And a lot of people you've heard them say that, like, it's atypical, and it's not a popular version of what God is, but it's out there. So today, what you've got three separate answers to the problem of evil. They all, the first one is definitely the free will defense. Okay? God creates us because he creates a being that it's better if it knows how to choose. And as a result of its being able to choose, evil can get into the world. Similar to that, you have Augustine's privation. God creates us as the ability as things that can choose. Yes, because it's better to create us that way. But also it explains that evil isn't a thing, it's lacking. It's our failure to do good, and we all fail to do good at various times in our lives. And then this last one that I just added, and that will not be on a test, this last one of, God as this world, this kind of Christian mystic position. Do with them, that last one what you will. The other two, the free will defense from the text, and then Augustine, you'll probably see that on an exam, okay? So go back, have a look at these sorts of things. And again, the most important thing to do is remember how these positions relate to and deal with the problem of evil as the problem of evil affects this notion of a God that is all good, all knowing, and all powerful. So with all of that said, if you have any questions, I'll sit up for another, 30 or 35 seconds or so to let it go. But if not, we'll call it at around 40 minutes and see what happens. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, or of course you can email me or ask me in class next Tuesday, and that's that. All right, so we'll give it roughly another minute. What else? Is there anything else to talk about that's interesting? Not particularly. I don't think so. Just kind of trying to draw it out a little bit so that if anyone has any questions, I can answer them. And remember, there's not another assignment due in the class until, I think, March. So we have a nice break. Some things that you all need to be paying attention to at this time of the year is that in about a week and a half to 2 weeks is registration or advising is going to begin. So you need to go ahead and figure out what's going on with advising, and set up a time to meet with your advisor. Make sure that you're getting the classes and you're following along so that you can graduate and get out of here in 4 years. Because while I like having you in the class, we definitely don't want to see you here we'd like to see you graduate because that's part of our job. So with all that said, I didn't see any questions. You all have a good day, and I will see you on Tuesday. Bye.